Hi everyone, I'm Yancy. Today I will talk about a serial killer, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. In this video, I will briefly describe Ramirez's significant events during his lifespan that would lead to his violent conduct, analyze his two possible mental disorders, explain biopsychosocial factors that would most likely underlie his criminal conduct, and a little reflection of biopsychosocial model. First, description of Ramirez's life events. Richard Ramirez was a notorious serial killer known for his unpredictable crimes. His crimes were motiveless and targeted many demographics ranging from men to women, young children to the elderly, in various methods including stabbing, shooting, raping, bludgeoning, and mutilating. He started his massacre in June 1984 and continued until he was caught on August 1985. On September 20, 1989, Ramirez was found guilty on 43 accounts of crimes, including 13 horrific first-degree murders, 1 second-degree murder, sex crimes, burglary, and so on. He was sentenced to death, but due to the length appeal process, was on his second appeal when he died of an infection in 2013 at age 53. Richard Ramirez was born in U.S. in 1960 and was the youngest of 5 children. His parents had been exposed to nuclear radiation when they still lived in Mexico. After they had immigrated to U.S., Ramirez's mother had long-term exposure to risky chemicals due to her workplace. At 2 years old, Ramirez was hurt by a falling dresser, which results in a short-term coma. At 5 years old, he injured his head again when he and his sister were playing the swing at a playground. This incident also rendered him unconscious for a time. Ramirez had his first epilepsy in grade 5. Throughout his childhood, he suffered frequent physical abuses from his father, and also witnessed numerous physical altercations between his grandfather and his father. When Ramirez was 10 years old, he started to sleep in the cemetery in order to avoid his father's tantrums and physical abuse. Ramirez's cousin Miguel, commonly known as Mike, was a Vietnam War veteran who returned when Ramirez was 12 years old. Mike had a very negative effect on young Ramirez's life. Under his influence, Ramirez started to use marijuana and then quickly moved on to the LSD and cocaine. He started stealing and robbing houses to pay for his drugs. Mike also told Ramirez about his disturbing activities during the war, which included physical and sexual abuses. Mike took photos during the sexual assaults and showed them to Ramirez. The photos provoked Ramirez's sexual arousal, and he frequently masturbated to them during his teenager years. When Ramirez was 13, he witnessed Mike fatally shooting his wife after a conflict. This had a profound effect on Ramirez. Mike was not found guilty by reason of insanity. Things did not get better for Ramirez. He started to stop paying attention at school, began to have sex with prostitutes. He was sent to Texas youth camp for juvenile delinquents. He dropped out of high school at 17 years old. He also claimed that Satan was protecting him. He became a drug user, and he was arrested numerous times for possession, breaking, theft, auto theft, and so on. From the summer of the year 1984, Ramirez started the first of his many killings by repeatedly stabbing a 79-year-old woman to death in her apartment. Up to his arrest in August 1985, he killed at least 40 persons by cruel means, such as stabbing, shooting, and forceful raping. Ramirez was caught on August 31, 1985. He received many fan letters starting from his trial and throughout his incarceration, and he had much time to read those due to California's length appeal process. He exchanged 75 letters with Doreen Leoy, who was a virgin, and eventually married her in 1996. He was on death row for more than 2 decades until he died in a hospital. I will use DSM-5 to analyze Ramirez's possible mental disorders, which are substance use disorder and antisocial personality disorder. Substance use disorder refers to the person persistently use substances and impairing his or her daily function in social, behavioral, and cognitive area. There are 11 criteria for substance use disorders in DSM-5, and at least 2 criteria must be met to be diagnosed. Ramirez could possibly align with 8 of these criteria. He used 4 substances in alcohol, marijuana, LSD, and cocaine. Ramirez started using marijuana when he was 10 years old and persisted in his using into adulthood. This aligns with the criteria of large amounts over a long time period. He also used a wide range of substances, and we can see him gradually moving into more dangerous and addictive substances from alcohol to cocaine. Based on this evidence, I can assume that Ramirez aligned with the criteria of persistent desire of using drugs. His method of intake went from snorting cocaine to injecting it. This showed that his tolerance increased through repeated use and he experienced diminished effect with the same amount of substances. Ramirez also started burglarizing houses to pay for his drugs, which would fit the criteria of spending lots of time to obtain substances, as well as the criteria of using substances, causing social problems. When Ramirez was 13 years old, he no longer paid attention to school, frequently skipping classes, and as a result failed and repeated grades, eventually dropped out of high school at 17. When he was 23 years old, he started to state that Satan was behind him and protecting him. All these are evidence of failure to fulfill major role as a student and giving up social, work, and educational activity. According to DSM-5 requirements, meeting 6 or more symptoms can be considered severe level, so I conclude that Ramirez could be diagnosed with severe substance use disorder. The antisocial personality disorder, also called ASPD, refers to the person constantly violates laws and shows no regards to others' rights. ASPD belongs to Cluster B personality disorders, which shows characteristics such as being erratic, emotional, and exaggerated. There are 9 main criteria in DSM-5 for ASPD, and Ramirez could potentially align with all of this. Ramirez was convicted of 43 crimes ranging from theft, auto theft, rape, and murder, showing a definite failure to conform the social norms and the laws. Ramirez had difficulty to obtain an honest job, which could align with the criteria of repeatedly deceitfulness and irresponsibility in the workplace. Given the spectrum of his crimes, there is clear evidence to show that he picked victims based on opportunity, likely the ease of breaking into their houses with no end goal in mind. His victims ranging from young children to seniors, and he attacked them through shooting, stabbing, raping, and even eye-gouging. This evidence points to the criteria of impulses, irritability, and recklessness. Ramirez appealed his conviction twice and died with 1 appeal still pending. He had said on record, "I have killed 20 people, man. I love all that blood." All this showing clear evidence of being remorselessness. ASPD requires the person to have all symptoms present after age of 18 and may show symptoms of conduct disorders before age of 15, which I think aligns with Ramirez's history as well. All the evidence I mentioned above are present after Ramirez turned 18. There are also numerous evidence to support his conduct disorders before age of 15. Through Ramirez's teenager years, he used various drugs, committed burglaries, had sex with prostitutes, and was even detained into a camp for junior delinquents. So, I conclude that Ramirez could be diagnosed with ASPD. Some biopsychosocial factors contributed to Ramirez's crimes. I will focus on 2 main biological factors which contributed to Ramirez's crimes. These are prenatal birth complications and temporal lobe epilepsy. A broad definition of prenatal birth complications is any exposure to unusual uterotoxins and difficulty experiences during pregnancy. Ramirez's mom was exposed to radiation caused by the nuclear bomb test in Mexico in 1948, and she was also exposed to hazardous chemicals after she immigrated to U.S. as a labor when she was pregnant with Ramirez. Kendall and Matnick found in their study that more violent criminals suffered from prenatal birth complications when comparing to non-violent criminals. There was another meta-analysis study concluded by Hodgins and his colleagues in 2002 that found persons who experienced neonatal complications, which included complications prior to birth and complications immediately before and after the birth, are more likely to commit crimes. This figure was given as twice as likely to commit a crime, 2.5 times as likely to commit a violent crime, and triple the likelihood of committing a crime early in life, when comparing to those that never experienced neonatal complications. Our study results supported the theory that Ramirez's exposure to toxics before his birth increased his risk of committing crimes. Another biological factor related to his risk of crimes is temporal lobe epilepsy. Temporal lobe epilepsy refers to unusual brain electrical impulses as a result of uncontrollable seizures. Ramirez had head injuries that rendered him unconscious twice between the ages of 2 and 5, and was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy in later years. Leon and Welsh in 2017 state that impaired temporal lobe leads to episodic discontrolled syndrome, which with the presence of repeated uncontrollable impulsivity can result in substance abuse, dementia, and temporal lobe epilepsy. The impulsivity would also increase the risks of committing crimes. A 2014 study by Ali and his colleagues also backs this assertion of the relationship between temporal lobe epilepsy and increased crime rates due to increased aggressivity. Results from these studies suggest that Ramirez's temporal lobe epilepsy is a factor that contributed to his crime. Two main psychological factors that contributed to Ramirez's crimes are his impulsiveness and narcissistic personality traits. Impulsivity refers to the personality traits of lacking plan, lack of control, and lack of consideration of consequences, leading to engaging in sensation-seeking behaviors as a result. The erratic nature of Ramirez's crime suggests that he did not have well-planned-out goals in mind. He carried out his attacks using a variety of tools such as guns, knives, and physical beatings. There wasn't a targeted demographics. He attacked victims of both genders and varied ages. Based on this evidence, I would assume that he did not plan his crimes and would have attacked anyone that presented an opportunity. Most of his crimes can be considered as reactive violence, which refers to crimes caused by extremely high arousal with no planning. Sometimes he killed his victims, but sometimes he failed. According to the general theory of crime, lack of self-control will lead to impulsiveness, inability to delay gratification, and inability to evaluate results. All three traits will push the person to engage in stimulus-seeking behaviors, increasing the possibility of crimes. Another study conducted by Farrington in 1992 also supported that impulsivity in boys is correlated to increase the possibility of delinquent in the future. Another psychological factor is Ramirez's narcissistic personality traits. Narcissistic personality traits refers to inflated self-image and extremely high level of self-esteem. DSM-5 requires meeting at least 5 criteria to be diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder. Here I do not think Ramirez aligns with 5 criteria, so he might not have been diagnosed as narcissistic personality disorder. However, I do think he meets some of the criteria, which independently still correlates to his crimes. When he was 22 years old in Los Angeles after several arrests, his sister tried to convince him to stop, but Ramirez refused and claimed that Satan was to protect him from being caught. This is definitely a case of an extremely high grandiose sense, believing himself to be uniquely connected to Satan. Bushman and Bellmeister in 1998 conducted a study and demonstrated the relationship between higher level of aggression and higher narcissism scores measured by the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. Leon and Welsh in 2017 discussed that social rejections and unwanted negative responses would impact a narcissistic person's inflated self-image and triggers their anger to protect their high self-esteem through violence. It was possible that any defense from his victims might have impacted Ramirez's inflated self-image and hence triggered the vicious attacks in order to protect his high self-esteem. There are numerous psychological factors that contributed to Ramirez's crimes, such as poor childhood development, negative peer relationships, negative behavioral model learned, post-traumatic stress disorders, and mismatched sexual arousal. The two main psychosocial factors I want to focus on are poor childhood development and mismatched sexual arousal. According to the theory of adult attachment patterns, insecure attachment styles are attachments that neither view self nor others as negative, or view both as negative. Ramirez's father was an impulsive person who frequently beat all his children, including Ramirez. When Ramirez was 10 years old, he started to sleep in the cemetery in order to avoid his father's tantrum and physical abuse. Combining with Ramirez's inflated self-image, I assume that he has a dismissing attachment style, with extremely high self-evaluation and negative view of others. Numerous studies had shown that insecure attachment will foster fewer moral standards, less empathy, more likely precursors of being diagnosed with psychopathy, personality disorders, impulsive behaviors, crime behaviors, and stalking. From Ramirez's story, we can see that his insecure attachment had led to some other consequences, such as lacking remorses for his victims, his possible antisocial and narcissistic personality traits, impulsive crimes, and night stalking in search of victims. Another psychosocial factor is Ramirez's mismatched sexual arousal. When Ramirez was 12 years old, his cousin Mike returned from the Vietnam War and bragged about his exploits during the wars. Mike often showed Ramirez photos he took during the war where the women were forced to perform oral sex on Mike under gunpoint. The young Ramirez started to show sexual arousal to those pornographic photos. According to classical conditioning theory, the pornography plays as an unconditioned stimulus, the UCS, and Ramirez's sexual arousal plays as unconditioned response, the UCR. The UCS is stimulus which evokes response involuntarily, while the UCR is automatic response, which is stimulated by UCS. The UCS are responses that we are born with and does not require to be learned. By pairing UCS with conditioned stimulus, the CS, by repeated times, the person will evoke the same topographical behaviors as the UCR, but through the conditioned response, the CR. Referring back to Ramirez, when he saw the pornography paired with sexual abuse and triggered his arousal through repetition, his sexual arousal gradually came as a result of sexual abuse rather than pornographic pictures. Sexual abuse became the CS, and his sexual arousal stimulated by the sexual abuse became the CR. The topography of the conditions is the same, but the roles were reversed. After this classical conditioning, Ramirez misunderstood his sexual arousal as a consequence of him engaging in sexual abuse. In this way, Ramirez's mismatched sexual arousal became one of his motivations to engage in sadistic, violent crimes. In summary, Richard Ramirez's violent crimes were not accidental and not triggered by a singular reason. Biological, psychological, and psychosocial factors combined to shape a manic storm of violence. These factors, like his impaired temporal lobe, substance abuse disorders, ASPD, negative traits, narcissism, and poor childhood development, all played a role. Applying biopsychosocial model to analyze reasons of crime is a good practice, as we can possibly prevent future crimes by seeking out the reasons that contribute to a person committing crimes. I would like to say thank you to everyone for watching my videos. If you have any comments or concerns, please feel free to contact me via emails, LinkedIn, or YouTube channels. Thank you so much. See you next time.